So in this chapter, you guys are going to learn how to sample well, how to do a survey, what kind of things create bias, stuff like that. We get statistics thrown at us every day in the media, and a lot of times they are biased, right? Population, the entire group of individuals we want information about. And a sample is a subset of individuals in the population from which we actually collect the data. So a lot of times the population is way too big. I don't know, sorry. A lot of times the population is way too big where you're not going to be able to survey like everyone that you're talking about, like everyone in the US or whatever. And so you're going to do a sample size. I'm scared of that speaker. All right, so write those down, though. Your population could be like all of Devlin, and then your sample size is just a classroom or something like that, where you throw out a survey. All right, so let's see if we can figure out what the sample is and what the population is. So furniture maker. All right, I'm going to have to make sure. Yeah. Okay, let's do it. A furniture maker buys hardware in large batches. The supplier is supposed to dry the wood before shipping it because wood that isn't dry won't hold its size and shape. So the furniture maker chooses 5 pieces of wood from each batch and tests their moisture content. If any piece exceeds 12% moisture content, the entire batch is sent back. So what is the sample, you guys? Yeah, the 5 pieces of wood is the sample. And what's the population? Just the batch, because he orders them by the batch. So the batch. Because you can't really say for each, you'd have to do each batch separately. All right, each week the Gallup poll questions a sample of about 1,500 adult U.S. residents to determine national opinion on a wide variety of issues. So, what is the sample? Those 1,500 adults, right? And what is the population? Everyone in the U.S., right? So this is supposed to be a reflection of everyone in the U.S.'s thoughts, okay? All right, so a sample survey. What's a sample survey? The first step in planning a sample survey is to say exactly what population we want to describe. So we're trying to get everyone's opinion in the U.S., even though we're not going to actually survey everyone. And the second step is to say exactly what we want to measure. That is to give exact definitions of our variables. So an example of something that we have to be careful of, and I don't know that I'm going to read this whole thing to you, is unemployment rate. So when we're talking about unemployment rate, you really want to specify what that means, because if you're a full-time student, does that mean you're unemployed? Not really, because you're not really looking for work, right? So they make it really clear what that actually means. If you worked at least 15 hours in a family business without pay, that actually means you're employed. You're also employed if you have a job but didn't work because of vacation, or you're on strike, or some other reason. So an unemployment rate of 9.7% means that 9.7% of the sample was unemployed, using the exact definition of both labor force and unemployed that we talk about, all right? So again, just define what you're talking about and make sure it's clear. Some ways that you can sample badly. And we will talk about these, so make sure you write them down. You want to know what these are. Suppose we want to know how long students at a large high school spent doing homework last week. So we go to the library and we ask the first 30 students that we see about their homework time. Why is this bad sampling, you guys? So people who go to the library are what? They're more likely to be doing homework, I would guess, right, than those who aren't going to the library. So this is called So this is called a convenience sample. When you choose individuals from the population who are easy to reach, this results in a convenience sample. And I would write this down. So when you're explaining the problem with a design of a study, you would say this is a convenience sample, and then you say if it leads to an overestimate or an underestimate. So this might lead to an overestimate of students, how many hours they study or whatever. All right, and either way, this is all called bias. It can create bias. So what is bias? That's when you consistently underestimate or consistently overestimate the value you want to know. So if you just do a simple survey and then you do another survey, you're going to always get a little bit off. But hopefully you're going to get overestimates and underestimates if there's no bias. But if you do a convenience sample, you're probably going to get bias. And we'll talk about another one here. So another example of bias where you're probably going to get an underestimate or overestimate is called a voluntary response sample. So this consists of people who choose themselves by responding to a general invitation. And so voluntary response typically is going to attract people who feel the same way about something. All right, so for the AP exam, the tip here, you first identify the problem with the design. So you could say, this is a voluntary response sample, or this is a convenience sample. Those are problems with the design. And then explain how that leads to an overestimate or underestimate. So usually it's obvious whether it's an overestimate or an underestimate based on what the example is, okay? All right, so here's an example. Explain how using your statistics class as a sample to estimate the proportion of all high school students who own a graphing calculator could result in bias. How many of you have a graphing calculator? What percent of this class, you guys? Like 100%. How many Math 7 kids have a graphing calculator? I don't think Math 7 kids are like allowed to use one. So basically, is it an overestimate or an underestimate? Overestimate if we use this class. And is it a convenience sample or a voluntary response sample? Convenience, right? It's easy. We're already in this class. So we asked ourselves, and that didn't really go very well as far as estimating the population. Okay? All right, so former CNN commentator Lou Dobbs doesn't like illegal immigration. One of his shows was largely devoted to attacking a proposal to differ or to offer driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. During the show, Mr. Dobbs invited his viewers to go to this website to vote on the question, would you be more or less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens? The result, 97% of the 7,350 people who voted by the end of the show said less likely. What type of sample, you guys, did he use, and why is this leading to bias? So what type of sample? Voluntary response, exactly. And what do you guys think, overestimate or underestimate? Overestimate. This is everyone who thinks one way that likes listening to this show in particular. Okay. All right, let's see. A farmer brings a juice company several crates of oranges each week. A company inspector looks at 10 oranges from the top of each crate before deciding whether to buy all the oranges. So what sampling method was used, and explain how it could lead to bias. What sampling method? This is convenience. You're just grabbing the top 10 oranges, So how could this lead to bias? Maybe they put all the good ones on the top, right? Like on purpose to make it look good. I don't know. Could lead to an overestimate. All right, the ABC program Nightline once asked whether the United Nations should continue to have its headquarters in the United States. Viewers were invited to call one telephone number and respond yes and another no. There was a charge for calling either number. More than 180,000 or 186,000 callers responded, and 67% said no. So what do you guys think? What kind of sample is this? Voluntary response. All right, and so then we would say overestimate or underestimate. Okay. Simple random sampling. How to sample well. So we just learned how to sample bad. We're going to learn 3 methods for how to sample well. You get to choose most of the time which method you want to use. All right. But what is random sampling? So random sampling involves using a chance process to determine which members of a population are going to be included in the sample. This one is a really important definition in yellow here. A lot of people didn't quite get this last year. So a simple random sample, or we call it an SRS, of size n is chosen in such a way that every group of n individuals in the population has an equal chance to be selected in the sample. And the part that people missed out on was that group of n individuals. So maybe I'm going to take a sample of 30. So anytime I choose 30, they need to be equally likely every single time that I do it. So let's say we had some prize and you guys were going to draw 2 names out of a hat. We would label everybody, we'd give everybody a number, and then we would, or give everyone a name, write it down, put it in a hat, shake it up, and draw them out. So that is one way to do this, the hat method, all right? If you're not sure and you can't remember, the hat method's a good way to go, as long as you don't have a huge group of people, because writing a name on a piece of paper takes time. So if you have like 10,000 people, you might not want to do that. All right, but if you have 30, you can use the hat method. We also have the calculator, which does random integers for us. You can use. You have to assign everybody a number, though. And then we have table D in the back of the book, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Table D is like a little bit more of a pain. However, you have to know how to use table D because it might be on the AP exam. Okay? And it just gives random numbers for you. But you can use one of these 3 choices. If you're going to use the calculator, oh wait, let's do this part first. Anytime you're doing technology or even the hat method, you have to talk about in specifics how you're going to do it. For example, you're going to label everybody. So if we're using the calculator, label everyone 1 through 30 or whatever it is, and then randomize, so use a random number generator to obtain n different integers from 1 through n. And you need to specify if you're going to skip repeats. Okay, so you might want to add that in. Skip repeats, which typically you would be, depending on what you're talking about, but once you pick somebody, you might not want to pick them again for your sample. If you're using table D, you also need to skip numbers outside of the range. If I only have 30 students and table D gives me the number 67, we would skip that number. Okay? Technology, though, you can set it from whatever you want to whatever you want. So if you have the Inspire, you go to Menu, Probability, Random Integer, and you have a min and a max. You might want to test it out. If you have the 84, I think you go to Math, Probability, Random Integer. Yeah, Math, Probability, Random Integer, find it, max. And then you plug in a min and a max. So if you want to do a random number from 1 to 30, plug in 1, 30, and it should give you an output. Go ahead and try it.